So what I have right here is some code that would normally work pretty well for an array, right? Say I wanted it for a 1D array. Start at 0, be less than numbers.length, add 1 each time, then print out numbers x. Okay? Now, this would be an effective method for printing out every value in a 1D array. But I want to show you what happens when I try it on a 2D array. Man, this is what comes out. Why? You might recognize this is the code that prints out the memory address of something. And you might remember that earlier on this year, we learned that if we just try to print out an array, it'll give us something that looks like that, right? So when we try to print out one 1D array, it'll print out the memory address. When I took this array and tried to print out numbers x, okay, we got 3. The question is why? Why do you think? Turn to the imaginary person sitting next to you right now, or your cat, or your guinea pig, and tell them, why does it print 3 memory addresses when I do numbers 1x? The secret is as follows. 2D array is actually an array of arrays. It's a bunch of 1D arrays. In the last class, I described each of these as being their own row, which is true. Each of these is a row in a table of a 2D array. But each of them is also a 1D array on their own. Make these a little bit more interesting here. And as such, numbers x represents each 1D array in the overall array. So let me demonstrate one more thing, just to make sure we have a good understanding of how these things are set up. I'm going to print out numbers.length. And then when I loop through numbers.length, I'm going to print numbers x.length. You'll notice when I just printed out numbers.length, I got 3. Okay. our 2D array is made up of 3 smaller arrays. Hence, its length is 3. But each array of integers, each 1D array of integers, is made up of 4 numbers. So hence, each has a length of 4. So rather than printing out every value in there, what we instead get is these 1D arrays, right? These memory addresses. And the question that we really have from here on out is, we used to have a way of looping through the values in an array. But it's a little bit trickier than in a 1D array. Right now, we only have code to loop through and identify that there are smaller arrays inside. We can't access the numbers like 4, 5, 6, 4, 7, 8, 9, 4. The question that we're going to ask for the rest of class, or for the next few minutes, is how do we actually loop through all of the values in a 2D array and say print out all 12 of these numbers rather than just my memory addresses when I run them down. Before I show you how to do that, I want you to pause for a second. These are our takeaways from the last couple of minutes. 2D arrays are made up of rows of 1D arrays. To access each 1D array, the name of the array followed by one number will return the row in the form of a first array, right? Number 1 will return that second 1D array inside of this thing. We also know that to access individual elements of an array, we have to use both indices. We learned this last class. We have to call like numbers 1, 1 to actually pull the values out of there. If you're having trouble understanding this part, you might want to go back and watch the last 5 minutes of this video. I would pause here for a sec. Once you feel good, check yourself off. Go ahead and advance, and I'll show you how to access all the values in a 2D array. So far in this class, we've used for loops to loop through the values in an array. And right now, numbers x represents each 1D array. And printing out numbers x is just going to print out the memory addresses of the array. Okay? So, I'm just going to make a little note to myself. The first for loop loops through each row, which is a 1D array. We've used for loops before in order to loop through and identify the individual elements of an array. And so what we actually have to do is use a for loop to go each array, and then within each array, for loop again, such that we can print out all these values. So this is where it gets a little more fun. The first for loop loops through each row. My second for loop loops through each column. Which is also the entries 1D array. You'll notice that on this for loop, I've now put numbers x dot length. This is the length of each individual 1D array. So I showed you before, this counted up our number of arrays, which is 3. This counts up the number of values in each array, which in this case is going to be 4. And with my 2 for loop setup, now when I click run, I made a mistake. Pause for a second. Correct my mistake. Explain to yourself why I need that one. Remember from last class that each value in a 2D array has 2 indices. First for the row, first for the column. You got to call them both for it to work. And now that I've got numbers x and y in here, boom. I'm printing out all the values in the array, and I now have a way of accessing them. The interesting thing about our for loop within a for loop model here is that this for loop runs a bunch of times before this one gets incremented. Let's make a quick table demonstration of how this thing works. My values in my for loop were, I think, 4, 5, 6, 7, 4. 4, 5, 6, 4. 8, 9, 4. 10, 11, 12. And my outer for loop was x. My inner for loop was y. And my outer for loop started at x equals 0 and went to x equals 2. My inner started at y equals 0 and went to y equals 3 based on the size of these arrays. I told you before that our outer for loop was looping through our rows. Does this row first, then the next, then the next. And within each one, loop through each column. So the way this works, since my outer for loop starts on x first, it'll start at x equals 0, and it'll loop through y equals 0, start the for loop again and increment it to y equals 1, start it again, increment it to y equals 2, then y equals 3. Once it's hit that maximum value of 3 in this for loop, it'll go back to the top of this for loop and increment it to x equals 1, then count up through y. Y equals 0, y equals 1, y equals 2, y equals 3. Then it goes back up, increments it one more time. Y equals 0, y equals 1, y equals 2, y equals 3. And you'll notice that this is the exact order in which these printed out. 4, 5, 6, 4, 7, 8, 9, 4, 10, 11, 12. 4, 5, 6, 4, 7, 8, 9, 4, 10, 11, 12. That is how you loop through all the values in 2D arrays. And everything that I've just said in the last 15 minutes is in your notes under pulling 1D arrays from 2D arrays and our double for loop code. The last thing we'll do today is talk a little bit about how to use these for loops to make some simple algorithms.